Hello everyone. So we are going to be talking about MPI messages in this presentation. Hi, I'm Preslin Peter from Christ University, and we would get into the agenda of the presentation before we start off. So the first we have the introduction to MPI messages, overview of MPI send and receive calls. Then we'd have an analogy where we'll discuss about MPI send and receive calls, comparing it to some real life example. And fourth, we have an algorithm for send and receive. Then we will discuss an algorithm of ping pong program. And last, we would have ring program. And after all this, we would conclude with elementary MPI data types. Now, we would go into the introduction. For the introduction, before we can understand what message passing interface is, it's very important for us to understand what MPI processes are. MPI processes are heavy-weighted, single-threaded processes. They have separate address spaces. One process cannot directly access variables in another process address space. So from this process, we have come into the need for message passing. So inter-process communication, which is required, is fulfilled by message passing. So what is MPI send and receive calls? So MPI send and receive calls, the process A decides a message needs to be sent to process B, and process A then packs up all of its necessary data into a buffer for process B. So when we say a buffer is generally can be compared to envelopes in our day-to-day life. So just like all the required letters and receipts are all bundled into one envelope when we send it to one sender, similarly, these buffers contain all these packed data, and they're all made into one buffer, and that is being sent to the required recipient. So this procedure gives us a detailed workflow on the MPI send and receive calls. We would now have a video presentation on explaining what MPI send and receive calls is so that we could understand it more easy and fast. So we would all see the analogy. So here is another recap to better understand how the same procedure of sending letters is compared to MPI messages. So like Alice and Bob, we have process A and process B. Process A decides the message that needs to be sent to process B. That becomes our first step. And then we have process A that packs up all of its necessary data into a buffer for process B. So we saw in our analogy that Alice had put in or collected all her letters into an envelope and then put it to the mailbox for it to be sent to Bob. So here these messages that are required are packed into a buffer to be sent to process B. Then comes these buffers that are often referred to as envelopes, as we already discussed. Now, after these messages are being put into the buffer, they need to be sent. And how these are sent? They are sent to a communication device. In our situation, the communication device is the network that is connecting all the required processes and devices. And the network is responsible for routing the message to the proper location, which is similar to the job of our postmen and post officers. The location of the message is defined by the process's rank. So that is how the network gets to know where our required recipient resides, the location to where this message needs to be transferred. Now, just because the location is given and the message is routed to that required recipient doesn't necessarily mean that it is the end of the road. Process B still has to acknowledge that it needs to receive this message from A, and only then is this whole procedure coming to a stop. Now, once B acknowledges it, the data is transmitted to B, and process A gets to know that process B has accepted the message, and after this, process A has the freedom to go to carry on the next work. So after understanding what MPI message is and what their workflows are, and even we've gone through an analogy, I think now it's time that we understand an algorithm that is written to message sending and receiving calls. So send and receive. So we have two functions, as you can see, MPI send and MPI receive. So these are called as the MPI send and receive calls. And here we have the data, which is of type void, and we have another variable with count. And we have another data type of MPI data type. And we have destination. So this variable would note down the location where our message needs to be sent. And now if you can see, we have the MPI common communication network. So which you can see that it is present in both the calls. And we have the similar, only difference being here we mention the source. And we have the MPI status. So this status basically is if our receive call is willing to accept or acknowledge the message that has been sent by the send MPI send call.